Okay. All right, we're about on the hour, so let's begin. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryankarvavahe Tejasvinavadidhamastu Mavit Vishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, welcome. Let's just get straight into the questions that we have through for this week. All right. So the first question is, what does Satwik effort look like? What does Rajasic effort look like? And can Rajasic effort hinder spiritual growth? Okay. So Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva, the three mental temperaments that every human being possesses. Right. So what are they? Just to give us sort of a way, I guess, of clearing our throats in a sense. Let's just go through the three mental temperaments just very quickly. So tamas is that state of inertia. We think of the absence of movement, the absence of physical movement, the absence of emotion, the absence of thinking, and so forth. Rajas is when our action is desire-ridden. It's prompted by personal interest. And sattva is that state where our actions are detached. So, and related to that, it's when we are objective to our actions rather than being involved, which is the state of rajas. Tamas is the state of deep sleep. When we are tamasic, we have that indifference. We simply don't care. Again, there's that idea of no movement of feeling or thought. Meh, I don't care. When we're in rajas, we have that attachment. So we care, but we are personally affected by what happens. We go up and down with the changes around us. Whereas sattva has that care, but you are still maintaining that objectivity. You're not personally affected or hurt by things. So that's that state of love. A tamasic person has fanaticism. A rajasic has worry and anxiety. Sattva has serenity. When we are tamas, we are suppressing ourselves, either our natural urges, our emotions, our desires. Rajas, the desire is there, but we are indulging in it. So we're being controlled by it. When we are in a state of sattva, the natural urges, desires, and physical contacts, for example, are well regulated. So there's this gradation. Lowest is tamas, rajas, then the highest is sattva. Okay, what's the question? What does sattvic effort look like and what does rajasic effort look like? So the word effort can be interpreted in different ways. So I chose to interpret it in the sense of the action that you perform and the type of actor that you are and what you are consistently applying yourself towards. All right. So this is coming from the section in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, where he describes different aspects of human personality in terms of sattva, rajas, and tamas. So the first is action. So what does rajasic action look like? And what does sattvic action look like? So rajasic action is desire prompted. That's the key element. It's prompted by a something that the ego wants to get out of the outcome. It's not just projecting an outcome, it's that sense of dependency. So if we go back to our list, rajas, you have desire-ridden, involvement, and attachment. So attachment is that sense of being dependent on getting the outcome. The example that we've used to contrast Rajas and Sattva, you go play tennis on a weekend, which you might do, once or twice a month. What's your sense of personal need or dependency on winning? Okay, in that situation, you've got zero dependency on winning. You're going to have fun with your friends, get some exercise, be outside, etc. Now you can imagine if you enter into a local competition, you start practicing, and now you want to win. Now there's a feeling of dependency or attachment to that outcome. If I don't get that, something bad will happen. My friends will be disappointed in me. I'll consider myself a failure. All my effort will have been wasted. Some negative outcome if I don't get what I want. Whereas when you're in a state of sattva, there's no such dependency. So that's rajasic action, is when there is that dependency. It's desire prompted. As a consequence, the mind vacillates into the past and future. Because it's concerned about getting that particular outcome, it worries in the future, well, what if I don't get it? And it goes back to past experiences where perhaps I did fail. So the mind is less under your own control when you're in rajas. A sattvic action or sattvic effort, again, it's being done out of obligation. You are fulfilling a genuine need. It may also be something that you like to do. Okay, so you're going to play tennis with your friends or with your family. You're fulfilling obligations. You have obligations to your body to keep it fit and healthy. You have obligations to your mind to have social connections. You have obligations to your family to see them every so often and catch up and swap love. So you're fulfilling all of your obligations and you happen to love it. So it conforms to your likes and dislikes, but it's not being driven by, I have to get something out of it. You're doing it because you recognize this as something that ought to be done. So because there isn't that dependency, that attachment, there is, again, that sense of serenity that comes with it. So what does rajasic action look like? Worry and anxiety, craving, dependency upon the result. What does sattvic action look like? There's a sense of flow. There's a serenity and a calmness that comes with it. Because there isn't that egoistic personal craving, attachment to the result. So that's action. So that's one part of it. Let's also look at acta. So what's a rajasic actor like? Again, it's the same kind of idea. We are emotional and desire ridden. So emotional doesn't mean that we have emotions. Emotional means that our emotions are overriding our intellectual sense of control. I know what I'm doing and I'm choosing it. In a sense, you can think of being emotional as a violation of your own autonomy. I'm in control of my choices, of what I say, what I do, how I act, and when I do it. But if I'm emotional, I start to lose that control. How often do we say, yeah, I got emotional, I said something I shouldn't have said, or did something I shouldn't have done? Essentially what you're saying is that I made a choice that was influenced by something other than what I would like to have done or what I ought to have done. So the emotions are edging in there. And we've got here violent and immoral. Okay, so this is obviously an extreme, but you can think of it as a spectrum. Violent and immoral, you can think of any time you try to coerce. Again, the ego is getting involved and it's trying to coerce or manipulate its environment or the people around it to get the job done, to get the thing for me. So again, the idea of immoral is perhaps that it goes against what your conscience would normally ask you to do if you weren't feeling pressurized by the desire. A Satwik actor, no attachment to do it or doership. So you're not attached to the action, you're not attached to the outcome, and you don't have an inflated sense of, look what I'm doing. The action is completed, and you know that you put your effort in to get there, but you don't have you don't linger in it. You're not developing a sense of identity based around the work, because you already know who you are. There's consistency and enthusiasm. So we are, again, going with the flow of our own nature, and it's unhindered by any kind of resistance that might come from your own conscience. You know what you're doing is the right thing for your nature. It fits into the goals that you have. It fits into the moral pattern of the environment around you. You're clear in what you're doing. So there's an enthusiasm because you know it's a worthwhile activity and you can keep it up. One of the key aspects of Satwik effort is, or actor in this case, is that whether or not the endeavor you're engaged in meets with the success or failure, you don't feel a sense of drop or an unnecessarily high rise. Take the example of weekend tennis player again. You lose the match. Are you affected by the loss? No. You win the match. Are you affected by the win? No. I mean, you celebrate, you enjoy it. And if you lose, perhaps you are disappointed. But there's a big difference. There's a world of difference between having an emotion of, say, happiness that you won or disappointment that you lost, and being affected. You can say, I'm disappointed that I lost, but my overall well-being hasn't been touched. Yeah, I wish I had won, but it doesn't matter. I don't care. Or similarly, the other way. Yeah, I won, and I'm happy that I won, but I'm not a happier human being as a result. I mean, it just happened. That happens to be that this week was my week. So unaffected by success or failure. Whereas a Rajasic actor, even the thought of failure is enough to bring in a sense of anxiety. And the last aspect is steadfastness. So what am I consistently pursuing? A Rajasic person is consistently pursuing personal gain. I want this. It's the acquisition and enjoyment for myself. So the key element here is that there is a forgetting of others in the environment. And this is where the other aspect of being a violent and immoral comes from. You can, in broad terms, think of Rajas as selfishness. Selfishness has the attitude of, my concerns alone exist. And you know that there are other, sentient creatures around you, but you don't actually take them into the calculus when you choose your actions. You're not actively thinking about the effect on their well-being. So we are steadfast in our own self-interest. Whereas the steadfastness of the Satwik individual, or Satwik effort again, is consistent pursuit of self-knowledge. So we can take that from the absolute perspective, self-realization or enlightenment. We can also take that from a relative perspective, which means growth. So Satwik effort in whatever field you happen to be in, relationships, family, business, exercise, Satwik effort includes that ideal of growth. getting beyond my egocentric desires and attachments, learning more about who and what I am so that I can be more self-satisfied, be more self-sufficient, have more resources to give to others, etc. Self-knowledge is its own end. You don't say, I need more self-knowledge so that I can. Self-knowledge is an end in and of itself. So let's go back to the question. What does Satwik effort look like? What does Rajasic effort look like? So if you take these elements of acta, action, and steadfastness, you start to get an idea of what the effort might look like. Okay, any clarifications before we go on to the third aspect of the question?
Glenn, could you explain the violent, immoral part again?
Yeah. So if I am Rajasic, then the key element there is that there is a selfish component. So selfishness is that attitude whereby we look to satisfy our own desires, and as a consequence, everything in the external environment is an object to me that either advances my interests or gets in the way. And if an object advances my interests, I use it. If an object gets in the way of my interests, I get it out of the way. Now, the problem is that other human beings, for example, are seen as objects. So selfishness doesn't see another center of subjective experience inside there. So that person, to me, is an object. Now, if you're getting in the way of what I want, I'll clear you out of the way. Now, how will I do that? It depends on the circumstances. So you can think of violence, you can think of it at the physical level, the emotional level, or the intellectual level. And in one way or another, I bully you out of the way of me and my object. So it's violent in the sense that you don't gain the consent or the buy-in of the other person to influence the way that you are influencing them. You're getting them out of the way. So the violence can be extreme physical violence, which is obvious to us, but it can have other more insidious ways. You can think of what is emotional violence, what is intellectual violence. So belittling somebody, mocking them, undermining their position, destroying their reputation. You can sort of encompass all these as violence. And immoral means that it goes against your own higher values. Your own conscience, if you could hear it, would object to the conduct. I'm going to spread some misinformation about this guy, ruin his reputation. Yeah, within a couple of months, everybody will see that it was a bunch of lies, but by then the damage is done. Mud sticks, and enough people will still believe it. No problem. So that's what I'm going to do to get my own status or position. It works. It's a form of violence, but the key aspect of the immoral is that there's a part of me that says don't do it. That's not the way to conduct yourself to get what you want. But because I'm being Rajasic, not only do I not see the center of subjective experience of another human being, I also can't hear my own conscience speaking. There's an agitation in the mind, a noise, and the signal coming from my conscience gets lost in all the noise. And it's often, it's possible that it's only after the fact when the thing is achieved, actually, that the conscience can be heard, because that noise of get it is suddenly quietened down, and there is left over that residual noise of the conscience, which is to say, we acted against our own higher values. And so guilt can come after the fact, once you've achieved the object, because that rush to drive you to get the object has quietened down. So violent and immoral, of course, is a huge scale, right the way through to actions that are highly destructive and cause a great deal of suffering to the other person and to your own, sort of a moral injury to yourself, through to things that, what we might call little white lies, for example. So somewhere on there, we're not 100% clear with our own conscience, our own convictions, because we're being influenced and biased by our own desires. So that is also part of the difficulty in terms of an assessment, because we may engage in actions which we justify. Politics is the game. We all know what game we're playing. So we're in a knife fight, and I'm coming with bare hands. Doesn't make sense. You got to bring a knife to a knife fight. So they're doing it. We've got to do it. Okay, now it may be true. It may not be true. The point is that you can, or the mind will want to justify an immoral action by putting a veneer of morality or justification on it. We're doing this for a higher cause. Okay, so this third aspect, can rajasic effort hinder spiritual growth? Okay. So how do we define or describe spiritual growth? What are some of the ways?
More sattva.
More sattva? Yep. So if you are promoting rajas, then you are consequently not promoting sattva. So yeah. How else do we describe spiritual growth?
Reducing desires.
Reducing desires, yep. Reduction of ego and egocentric desires and attachments and so forth. So spiritual growth is the reduction of ego, desire, and attachment, or as you said, it's the increasing of sattva. So there is this law of identification: as you think, so you become. The idea being that we are generating our personality, or regenerating our personality moment to moment, with whatever quality of thoughts, desires, and actions we're entertaining. Seed gives rise to a fruit. That fruit contains more seeds of the same. So if I am acting from rajas, then I'm promoting rajas. So rajas is this sense of ego, this desire, it is attachment. So anytime I have that I'm promoting my rajas, I'm moving further away from my spiritual goal, because I'm creating further ego, creating more desires, and creating attachments. So can rajasic effort hinder spiritual growth? Yeah, it certainly can, because it's promoting the thing we're trying to remove. But we do need to be careful with this idea, because you can't get rid of rajas. The only way you can get rid of rajas is two ways: go into deep sleep, then you're pure tamas, or become enlightened, then you're beyond sattva. So beyond those two extremes, or sorry, within those two extremes, you have got rajas. And so there is a potential pitfall here that if we say, okay, well, I've got to try and get rid of my rajas, that we throw the baby out with the bathwater and that we actually stop acting. We don't have clear goals and ideals to move towards because we're afraid of getting rajas in there. Well, if I don't want rajas, I can't really do this action without rajas. So I know what, I won't do the action at all. So this is, actually we're touching on this in the Ishavasya Upanishad. The first mantra there says everything is just this underlying consciousness. And so the thought process that the ego could appropriate is, well, if everything's only the reality, good, what need is there of action? I don't need to do anything. And so you can fall into a state of tamas because you've got this beautiful idea. In a similar sort of way, I want to reduce my ego, desire, and attachment. So I'll get rid of anything where it seems to be desire prompted. But there is a desire for growth. That desire for growth has rajas. It's a Satwik desire, but the very fact that I want it means that rajas is present. So you can take these ideas of sattva, rajas, and tamas and sort of nuance them a little bit and talk about, say, rajasic sattva or sattvic rajas. So this idea, I want growth. The object that you are pursuing is sattvic. When we talk about steadfastness, the consistent pursuit of the self, or from a more relative perspective, self-development. So the object that you're pursuing is Satwik. It's self-knowledge, it's growth. But who do you want it for? I want it for me. Now, if you try to remove the fact that you want that growth for yourself, you might end up removing the whole thing. Because I want growth it's kind of they're inextricably linked. It's like, I can't think of a good example, but think of two things together, and if you pull one out, you ruin the whole thing. So yes, rajasic effort can hinder your spiritual growth, but you won't get there without some rajas. But it's a matter of making your rajas in the service of sattva. So the example that is always being used is with the pole vault. You can't get over the bar without the pole. You can't get to higher spiritual heights without rajas. There must be that passion, if you like. But it's the slave, not the master. And it's a tightrope walk, because while we say that you need that sense of urgency or that desire for your own growth, it can get in the way. And result orientation in the spiritual field is a huge pitfall. Developing expectations is a huge pitfall. Am I growing fast enough? Why am I not where I want to be? You know how long I've been at this and I still do this, and this? Anytime we get ourselves stuck in those kind of loops, that's when the rajas is getting a bit out of control. So that's what we need to be mindful of, is those times where the mind is going in those loops of expectation and disappointment, of worry and anxiety, whether it's how you look in front of the mirror or whether it's how you look in front of your spiritual community. There are elements of rajas that can help us along the way, but there are certainly elements that can hinder us. And so being mindful of those hindering aspects, knowing what they are and knowing how to identify them within yourself and knowing how to negotiate your way out of them is an important part of that practice. Yeah.
Sorry. So what I'm hearing is there's a sattvic and a rajasic element to this of I want to grow. And so whilst you're on that path, you will experience the consequence of the rajas. You will have the agitation, but at the same time, it shouldn't be your biggest feeling. It should be more the sattvic state of mind of being calm, being clear, you're going in the right direction. It should be a part of it, but it should be like not a major part of it. If you if you do it the right way.
Yeah, when you say you shouldn't experience agitation, or rather that you will experience agitation, there's no guarantee that you're going to experience agitation. If the rajas is, if you like, well controlled by the sattva, or to put another way, if the mind's desire is well controlled by a discerning intellect, then you are harnessing that power. It's when the power, or the, if you want, like, if you, the motivation of the rajas starts to break out of those boundaries and decide for itself what happens next, where your attention goes. That's when you'll experience the agitation. But if you're clear, if you have a clear understanding of yourself and what your nature is, I want growth, it's just a part of my nature, then you can, harness it. And the desires themselves are being sanctioned by the intellect. So then you won't experience agitation. You might experience in the same way as the tennis player. Okay, the tennis player double faults. Again, this is our weekend tennis player playing with her friends. She double faults. And swearing at the tennis racket in her hand. She's not really upset. There's a bit of agitation or anxiety or frustration, whatever word you want to use, but it's not really touching her. It comes, it goes, it doesn't stick. She doesn't stand there on the court getting into a loop. I can't believe I've double faulted. I mean, what's wrong with me? She won't think about it when the match is finished. Then the natural consequence of double faulting, in, out, because the sattva is predominating. So when you say that there will be agitation, it's important that we understand what that means. There's a difference between the natural effects of being human and getting stuck and feeling affected by those effects. Affected by the effects. Not the best choice of words, but so yeah, you can think of that rajasic sattva as harnessing a desire. So the object is sattvic, and there's a personal interest in getting it, but that personal interest, which is what motivates us, or your intellect can see that personal interest functioning and says, yeah, it's okay because it's moving us forward. And of course, the danger is that you let it continue and then you get diverted and think about something else, and that just sort of breaches the walls of that container, as it were. think it's somewhere in chapter 3 of Gita, where Krishna says, all action is tainted by desire, just as all smoke, just as all fire has smoke. You can't have fire without smoke in it. You can't have an action without desire in it. And even the activity of your own self-development, of your own spiritual growth, has desire in it. So you can't get rid of it until the very end, which is when you also get rid of the sattva. So up until that point, redirect it and use it, harness it. Okay, any other clarifications? Okay, next question is coming from Gita chapter 14, verse 19. So does understanding that one is made up of the self plus one's nature help in overcoming inferiority or superiority complex? Okay, so what is the commentary saying? As a seeker begins to identify with the supreme self within, he views the functioning of the gunas objectively. He realizes that the self merely enlivens the gunas to manifest their respective natures. He remains relatively detached and unaffected by the manifested gunas. So the word gunas here refers to tamas, rajas, and sattva. You can think of it as exactly as the question states, one's nature. So you can replace that with one's nature. So as a seeker begins to identify with the supreme self within, he views the functioning of his own nature objectively. Okay, so what's the question? Does understanding that one is made up of the self plus one's nature help in overcoming inferiority or superiority complex? So there's an example that the Swami gives a lot, and he says, put your thumb out in front of you. And he says, focus on your thumb. And what do you notice? Background goes out of focus. Now he says, focus on the background. What do you notice? Thumb goes out of focus. All right, so where you focus on the thumb, the background goes out of focus, and vice versa. So does understanding that a human being is made up of self plus nature help in overcoming a complex, superiority or inferiority? So the purpose of this concept, like all of these concepts, is to redirect our attention. You can think of all of these concepts as like sort of guardrails. The mind is traveling in a particular direction all the time, whether we are aware of it or not. Just like the physical body, our physical bodies are hurtling through space. They're whizzing around on the surface of the globe. We don't notice it. We don't notice the trajectory of our bodies, but it's moving. The mind is also moving. Our attention is going somewhere. So if it's going too far in that direction, so just add a guide rail and just knock it gently so it goes back in that direction. And then it will go too far in that direction, so just knock it back. So all of these concepts are there to sort of guide our attention so that it can go where we want it to go. Again, because of this law of identification, as you think, so you become. So with this idea that a human being is self plus nature, it offers us now a place to put our attention. I can put my attention either wholly on my own nature, or I can begin to place my attention somewhere other than that. And there's different ways to understand what that means. But it's, again, based on this principle of as you think, so you become. The question of does understanding help in overcoming inferiority or superiority complex? Mere understanding is not enough. We can understand the concept. It won't do nothing, but it won't do a lot. So this is the idea that we're familiar with, that intelligence and intellect are not the same thing. Knowing something is not the same as integrating it and having it be real for you. Each one of us knows the theory of reincarnation, but how real is it for us? Each one of us knows that selfishness is detrimental to our well-being, but are we selfless? So no. So there's a difference between the intelligence, the knowing of it, and the actual integration of it. So let's explore this idea a little bit. What is a superiority or an inferiority complex at its root?
It's the ego that is making you put special attention on yourself, either by saying you are better than others or less than others.
Yeah, so it's an exaggerated emphasis on your nature. So now whether you have correctly or incorrectly assessed your nature is a separate issue. But the point is, it's an exaggerated emphasis on it. You might have a correct assessment. I am the best at tennis. Look at the ATP rankings. I'm better than anyone on this planet, or at least in this room. But it's a different thing to have an assessment that is accurate and an exaggerated emphasis on it. Or you might have it completely wrong. You might be terrible at tennis and think you're great and still have a superiority complex. Vice versa. You have an exaggerated emphasis on your nature. Yeah, you're terrible at tennis. Correct. But then you exaggerate that and become defined by the qualities of your own nature. So there is that involvement in your own nature, whatever the qualities happen to be. Exactly as you said, that's treating yourself as a special case. So this only comes when who and what you are is defined by a specific element of your nature. So generally speaking, let's say of a superiority or inferiority complex, it comes because there's an exaggerated emphasis on one aspect of your nature. So a person might have a superiority complex or an inferiority complex because of physical appearance, because of the sort of intelligence that's generally measured in high schools, because of, add anything here. It's often just one singular aspect of our nature. The point is that there is an identity built around the functioning of your nature. So go back to the quote or from the commentary. He views the functioning of his nature objectively, realizes that the self enlivens his nature and remains detached and unaffected by his manifested nature. So as you begin to integrate this idea that, well, I'm made up of qualities, properties, functions, skills, things I'm good at, things I'm not good at, etc. My nature. I'm made up of my nature, gunas, that is enlivened by some self, which is distinct and different and unaffected by whatever the gunas are doing. What is that? As we start to investigate that, what happens is that we shift our attention onto that self. Now, relatively, that means the more you can think of it as the more long-lasting aspects of your nature. You can think of it also as the more important aspects of your nature. I'm very good looking, someone might say. How do I relate to that? Well, it depends. If I'm at the physical level of my personality, I'll develop a superiority complex. If I understand that the emotional component of my personality is more important, then it just doesn't matter so much to me. I don't define myself that way. So this is a relative shift. If I begin to define myself by the subtler aspects again, my moral fiber, my spiritual outlook, then the other elements begin to take on less importance. I just wish I was outgoing and friendly like that guy is. He's so gregarious and just gets on with everybody and goes into the room and works the room beautifully, and I sort of sit in the corner and don't. Why do you wish you were different to who you are? Well, because I'm defining myself by those elements and comparing them to others. If you can shift your attention off those elements, then you simply are what you are. You begin to transcend the categories of good and bad and simply put everything into the singular category of is. I'm quiet, introverted, shy, and don't like crowds. Is that good or bad? No, it just is. It's great if you're a research scientist or a librarian. It's bad if you are a car salesman. So this sort of, if you like, transcendence of categories happens as you begin to transcend those layers of your personality. So self-development is that relative shift. The idea of shifting the focus of attention from the nature to spirit is encompassed in the 3 spiritual disciplines. So when we are practicing gratitude, we're shifting attention off the ego. When we are feeling devotion, we're similarly shifting attention off the ego. The ego is that sense of I know, taking things for granted. This is true. Devotion is that recognition that something amazing is going on here and I have no idea what it is. The practice of knowledge. What is true? What is long lasting? What is eternal? What is real? And who am I? As you begin to investigate who am I really, you begin to shed ideas that I am the way I look. Well, I'm not the way I look. This is what the body appears as, but that doesn't define me. So you're identifying with higher values. And service is to take the attention off my ego's demands and to think about what do others need. So in each of these practices, relatively and absolute, you are shifting the attention off the ego. And the ego is this identification with the qualities of nature. So, what was our question? Does understanding that one's made up of the self plus one's nature help in overcoming inferiority or superiority complex? It helps when you start to integrate it. And you start to first of all have faith or a belief that there's an identity that is not defined by whatever I think my current nature is. And that starts by going into a higher aspect of your nature, but that's still the functioning of the gunas. But it relieves you to some degree of the burden of ego. And you don't even need to go to the absolute level to overcome superiority or inferiority complex. You can just be on the path of growth. If you're established on the path of growth, you'll find that superiority and inferiority complexes fall away even before you get to massive heights, because you're more interested in what you are becoming than what you are. Yeah, I am, attached to my ideas and stuck in my way of thinking about things, but I'm becoming someone who's more flexible in his thinking. Yeah, I am someone who's quick to judge, but I'm becoming someone who is more thoughtful, who takes a pause. Yeah, you've begun to recognize your nature. Yeah, I'm a people pleaser, and it's ruined my authentic relationships. But I'm becoming someone who is more honest and authentic about her needs. Whatever, you understand where you're at, and you also understand where you're going. So that focus on the ideal of growth, not necessarily the specific definition of it in terms of what you're becoming, but just the simple idea of self-development can help to, at least first of all, subdue the ego complexes, just sort of puts them to sleep a little bit. It's like a sedative. And ultimately they just fall away entirely, because your opinion of me is, I'll take it on board, but ultimately it just doesn't matter. And superiority and inferiority complex only exist in the context of how I'm viewed by others. So as you begin to define yourself less by your nature and how you're viewed by others, superiority and inferiority just fall away. But it's not enough to understand it. You've got to work it. Any clarifications to that or anything related? Any other questions at all?
I don't have a real question. I just want to explain that you're not seeing my face because my computer's not allowing me to for some reason or another. I came in late because I thought it was going to start earlier or later. And what I have heard is very, very helpful to me, and I just want to say thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Okay, if that's all the questions we have. That you had a class early. As usual, appreciate the attention, the attendance, and the questions. We're back 6:30 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow for Ishavasya Upanishad, and then our Q&A on Friday morning Pacific time as usual. So for those joining, see you then. For those not, see you next time.
Hari Om. Thank you, Glenn.
Hari Om.
Yeah, I am.
Thank you, Glenn.